G'day, Dave. Thanks for coming on Saved by the Bell. Mate, super impressed with your story. It's an incredible journey. Can you talk us through how you became stranded for 18 months in Antarctica?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for having me on, and keen to unpack it and go through the stories. Look, it's like anything, it starts years before that. It didn't just all of a sudden, hey, you're stuck in Antarctica during a global pandemic for far longer than expected, with an uncertain ride home and kind of no end in sight. Which, up until it happened to us, I was down there with a team of 24 at the time. Up until it happened, it was the realms of science fiction. This sort of stuff didn't happen. You'd read about it in a book or you see a movie, you're like, I wonder what would happen if you're stuck on an Antarctic station when a pandemic breaks out or there's aliens and all these sorts of crazy.
Isn't it? Kind of crazy.
That's right. So we were originally going down for 12 months, which was part of a sort of ongoing rotation with the Australian Antarctic program that they've manned those stations for sort of 70 odd years, with a 73rd rotation of Australia's permanent presence in Antarctica.
And what were you doing for that 12 months?
So I was running the station. I was a station leader.
Gotcha.
And you're doing the overwinter science and overwinter maintenance to keep the place running. And everything in Antarctica focuses around the 3 months or so of summer. So we had that big summer period of we're talking 2019-20, that summer. So we'd left Australia in October 2019.
I think COVID kicked in March
Correct.
2019.
So that was the last time we saw a ship. The ship came down, picked up all the scientists that had been there for summer, left 24 of us there, and we thought we'd be there for about 7 more months through the winter, from March through to sort of October, November, and we'd go home as planned in sort of late 2020.
Yeah.
By halfway through the year, so 23rd of June 2020, when we're nearly 2/3 of the way through our trip at this point, and the end is only a few months away, I remember the day really clearly. I went into my office, fired up Microsoft Teams for a meeting with my boss back in Hobart, or just outside of Hobart where the head office was, and he just lays it out cold, and he's like, look, mate, got to update you on some logistical changes.
That's bad news for you.
I don't even think he said bad news. It's just clinical of like, I've got to update you on some logistical changes of the fact that, we don't have a ship. The ship that we thought was going to come and get you, which was a brand new vessel being built under contract, was further delayed because of COVID. The old ship had been on-sold and couldn't come and get us anymore. We couldn't do any aviation that summer because of COVID and implications that was having on getting aircraft in from running the flip season in North America. And a whole range of other operational reasons that just distilled down to like, well, what does that mean? He's like, well, we're going to have to leave you and your team there sort of indefinitely. We reckon we'll get you out at the end of summer, so sort of early-ish 2021. But there was a very live chance, could have gone even longer.
So this is the midway through 2019 or towards the end of 2019?
Midway through 2020, they're telling us now that you're staying.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. So right in the height of the pandemic.
And they hadn't given you a date of when they're going to pick you up?
No, not at that point.
And did you have family back in Melbourne?
So I was thankfully kind of single at the time, which helped in some regards. I could just focus then on the problem of you've now got a team of people that thought they were going home who are now there, at least it ended up being another 6 months. And the uncertainty, though, was the challenge of when you go into something. I like to describe it as if you're running a marathon, you're running a marathon. You go, okay, I got 42 Ks, give or take, right? You go, if I can get to each 10K marker and I'll get to the 40K and then it's just, change from there and I'll stumble home. But if you get to the 30K mark and make a wrong turn or they go, oh, you've got a purple bib, you're doing the ultra marathon, good on you. And you're like,
shit.
What? You just be like, what do you mean? And they go, oh, not only are you doing the ultra marathon, but we won't actually even tell you when it ends. It might be 50, but it might be 60K. So just keep running. And you'd go, you don't know what to do. You know if you're running your marathon, you're like, right, I got to do 5-minute 30Ks or I'm aiming for 6-minute Ks or whatever it is at your different times. And when you don't know how far you're running, you're standing, you go, well, I don't know. Do I walk? How far am I going? Am I doing what distance? So that was the challenge then for us mentally, was not knowing when it ended, when it was going to end and what the end would even look like.
And how were your supplies, food? Other resources?
Thankfully, the way we run the Antarctic stations is there's a lot of redundancy. So we sort of run double or triple redundancy in terms of food stocks and fuel and things. Now, that often means you've got to then go into rationing. Thankfully, we didn't. Besides things like we ran out of crunchy nut cornflakes and ran out of cashew nuts.
The important things.
But we can talk about nutrition as well if you want.
Yeah,
but
very keen.
Like that starts to decline a little bit.
So no fresh meat, no fresh produce.
No, like frozen meat and everything, obviously that'll freeze for years. And we had a small hydroponics lab where you could grow kind of cost lettuce and little baby tomatoes and a few things, which would supplement the diet to some degree. And we had a great chef. So that really helped.
That's great.
We've got a full-time chef down there running it. But when everything's frozen and then over time you're starting to deplete the good stuff and you're saving, let's save the good meat for Christmas or let's save it a little bit longer and that stuff. So
how was the mental health of, there was 24 individuals?
Yep.
And how was the mental health of each individual?
Look, if you broke it down, it would be a bell curve. Most people got on board with the challenge and were like, okay, unexpected, but not unheard of in Antarctic exploration and Antarctic expeditions that, hey, things change. You're going to stay a bit longer. And we had a whole number of other challenges along the way, including right up to the end when we were coming home. The ship we were on that was chartered halfway across the Southern Ocean had a catastrophic explosion, huge fireball engulfed the engine room. Yeah, and that was a whole other story.
Was this ship going to pick you up?
It picked us up. So when we're on our way home and we're a week away from Australia and you're just daydreaming of, I'll be back home, sailing up the Derwent, and the ship catches fire. And it was pretty dire. It took a couple of hours to get the fire out and under control and everyone accounted for. And thankfully, everyone was safe and some brave action from the crew and others on board to manage that particular emergency. But it was then another 4 or so hours of standing there dead in the water, 6 meter waves rocking side to side. There's a 100 meter ship and you're still rocking 30 degrees either way. Not knowing if we're going to have to get on the lifeboats, an abandoned ship in the middle of the Southern Ocean, in the middle of nowhere. We were still a week out of Australia. No other ships anywhere near us as well. So we would have just sat there in the dead silence of the waves for a number of days, if not a week. Thankfully, we were able to get the ship restarted on the one remaining good engine and sailed back into Fremantle, which was slightly closer at the time. So,
did anyone break down during the whole time that you were stuck in Antarctica?
Yeah, that's a really tough one to unpack. So everyone, and this is what I love to talk about with mental health, is you'll all have your own journey. And out of the 24 of us, anyone that says they didn't have a bad day or a rock bottom is kidding themselves. And they would admit that everyone had moments and days where you either cracked or you lost it. It's never about what you lose it. And there was arguments over doorstops and people leaving vehicles unfueled and all sorts of random standard stuff that could happen. People haven't packed up tents properly or they've left a door open and snow's got in or whatever it is, right? So you'll have a blowout or you'll snap over that and you'll lash out at someone or something. We all had those moments. It's about then acknowledging that that's human. That's going to happen when you push to the limits like we were. You're going to have those moments. And we even had incidents where people were basically borderline, like, I can't do this anymore. I've had enough. I need to get out of here. Yeah. And you have to sit down with them and talk them back from the ledge to be like, look, we can't do that. The one thing that's going to solve...
Jump off the iceberg. I've had enough.
That's right.
I'm done.
Yeah. That's right. And you just go, the one thing that's going to solve that problem is to go home. And that's the one thing we can't do. We've just got to find a way to work through it, which in a lot of ways meant then people rose to the challenges even better. And I like to use the quote, quitting's not an option in the middle of an Antarctic winter. And certainly when you're in the middle of a pandemic where they can't come and get you. When you have to do it, you find the resilience, you find the way. And that's what kind of led to this mantra of resilience becomes a choice. Often if you don't have an option, that your choice is to find a way to do it and continue and go through. And you look at some of history's greatest survival stories and tales, and it'll come from a fact that they mentally went, I didn't have an option. I had to do it. Whereas if quitting is an option or you've got a way out, that voice gets louder and louder of like, you can quit. There's a way out. Someone say, do you want to?
It's always a devil on the shoulder that always says, you're not worthy, you have to quit.
That's right.
Did you find that some people were more resilient than others? And if so, why were they more resilient?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think if you took in that particular year, those 24 individuals and put all their resumes and bios and ran it through AI or a team of psychs, you'd get it pretty right, but there'd be some outliers. And there'd be a few where you go, this person should have been amazing, or this person should have been at the higher end of the scale, or someone who you actually look at it and go, I haven't really done that much. You talk about resilience of it's often the kind of the sum of all your other tough experiences. If you've had, you're a bit older, you're a bit wiser, you've had some challenges in your life, you'd think they might be more resilient.
Or
all that sort of stuff. Versus someone you go, actually, they're quite young. They haven't had those experiences, but they've got adventurous attitude and a kind of can-do attitude, that tended to be the one that saw people do better, was if they actually had full buy-in to, I want to go on an adventure.
Yeah.
And then when that adventure happens, e.g. it gets worse, you get extended, the ships catch fire, you had to do a medical evacuation, you got all these crazy things going on.
Yeah.
If you had full buy-in on, I want an adventure, when that adventure gets tougher, you do better.
Yeah.
Whereas if you've gone, hey, this will be an interesting opportunity, and your motivation or your reason was a bit different, and then you get pushed, it becomes a bit harder.
For those listening, how would you recommend people build resilience?
Good point. You build it in the smallest elements of your day-to-day. I talked before just about resilience becoming a choice.
Yeah.
You go, and we were talking about this before off air, around your morning routine. Do you wake up and just go, I'm going to sleep in the absolute maximum and then do the bare minimum to get out the door and get to work or to get the kids to school or get the kids or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Or do you choose, I'm going to get up 5 minutes earlier and just do some stretches and some push-ups. I'm going to get up. And then that builds the next day. You go 10 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
And then you start to go, okay, let's do half an hour earlier. And then you're saying, what was your one now?
I just laugh because we just talked about my morning routine.
Yeah.
And it's gone from 1 hour to 2 hours, 3 hours, and now it's at 4 hours. It's too much.
Exactly.
But I'm very disciplined with it.
Yep.
And I think discipline creates resilience. And I'm a creature of habit. I love doing the same thing over and over again and just seeing the positive outcomes from it.
Yep.
And I think that's where, if you're resilient to things, it's great. It's great for life. It's great for you. It's also great for your health. So,
absolutely. And you build it long before it's tested and long before you ever need it. It's a bit like that, like the kind of 10,000 hours thing of if you get to a point where if you take the average person off the street, put them in an Antarctic station during the middle of a pandemic, if they've gone from 0 to 100, they're probably not going to do that well on statistics. I'm sure there'll be plenty of people.
Can you explain the 10,000 hours to people?
So 10,000 hours, I don't know who remember, was it Bruce Lee or...
If you do 10,000 hours of the same thing, it becomes a habit, or rather...
Exactly.
Please explain.
Yeah, so I've just been reading Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. It's a bit dated as a book, but still great. And he covers the 10,000 hours principle, which is, he's got some good examples of it where you've got people like Bill Gates he uses as a great example that when the time came to launch Microsoft and software and everything in the late 80s, he'd already been working hard at programming and punch cards and had all that experience. So that the minute the market was there and the moment was right, he's already got the experience and he's ready to go. And I think Bruce Lee talked about the 10,000 hours thing as well. Of don't learn 100 punches half decently. Learn one punch 10,000 times so that when you hit well. And that's the same with resilience. You're not going to be able to go, I've done some aptitude testing and I think I've got my morning routine and I've got my plan. I can deal with anything. You actually look at it and go, in all the little elements of your life, and I think this spoke to the expeditioners I've seen that do better in Antarctica and those real extreme environments, they've tested little bits of resilience in everything they do. They're disciplined. They've failed as well, and they've seen that failure, and then they've gone, hey, what's going to make me succeed next time? Better preparation is probably 9 times out of 10 going to help you in business, life, fitness, whatever it is. And that's where that 10,000 hours thing's coming from. Once you can master your trade or your skill, and you've got 10,000 hours of repetition of it.
Yeah.
When the moment comes and you need to stand up and do it, boom. And I think in a lot of ways what helped me lead that team and get through that situation was that it certainly wasn't my first rodeo in terms of I'd been in extreme environments. And
you were in the army.
I've been in the army for a couple of years when I was a young fella. Yeah. Was lucky enough to go on a peace.
Oh, you got the build for it.
Yeah. Oh, hey, that's not the good gains these days. Been in the good paddock over summer.
You enjoyed yourself a bit too much.
That's right. But yeah, and I'd had 10 years working in war zones and conflict zones before that.
Oh, wow.
In uncertain environments, challenging political climates. You've got bad guys out there as well. Always get a vote in your day and your week and your month and your trip. So I'd had that. So then when it came to it, and you're getting all the craziness of what happened to us in 2020 unfold, you're drawing on each of those little experiences to find the moment. And I have this mantra as well of lead the team you've got in the situation you face. That it's not good enough to just go, oh, well, Harvard Business School taught me to lead a team like this. It might require, and what often confuses people or throws people, they think, oh, running an Antarctic expedition, you'd run it like a military operation. Like, all right, Nick, you're doing this, you do that. And
that's what I would imagine.
yeah, exactly. Not at all. Yeah, when the ship catches
just
fire.
a wild party.
No, the thing is like people, they think that. And yeah, when it's push comes to shove, it's during a resupply or you've got an emergency. Yeah, it's pretty direct. But the rest of the time, you're trying to run it, and the best way to do it is like it's a volunteer sports club where you're appreciating everyone and everything that's happening. And you're not just saying, hey, Nick, I need you to go and do this. You're like, hey, Nick, this needs to get done. You're happy to do that.
Yeah.
And they'll generally go, yep, happy to do that. It's part of my job, or it's my turn to take the bins out or shovel some snow, whatever you need done. And you're running it in that collegial, kind of egalitarian way.
How did you entertain yourself and everyone else for 18 months in Antarctica? Like, obviously, you've got your daily chores, but what else would you do to make sure that everyone's kind of enjoy themselves and keep themselves busy?
Yeah, you make your own fun. And that's one of the, I like to talk about the things that I learned in that. And I've done 7 different Antarctic expeditions as well. So it's not all just about that one trip, but it's what you learn to do to keep yourselves entertained. And some of the best memories from myself and the teams I've worked with down there are creating your own fun. And one of my favorite ones was May 2020. We're in the kind of middle of winter and running out of things to do. And we used to celebrate anything and everything down there. And we'd go to the calendar each week and be like, oh, what is it? Oh, yeah, it's Mental Health Day, or it's Are You OK Day, or it's Men's Day or Women's Day, whatever it is. You pick your event and you go, yeah, we'll do that. And we're in May and there's not a lot of public holidays and not much going on. So we're like, okay, what do we got? And we're like, all right, we got 4th of May the 4th be with you, Star Wars Day. We're like, oh yeah, maybe. And we go, okay, what's after? You got Cinco de Mayo. You go, okay, Cinco de Mayo. We don't really have any Mexicans or Spanish on the team. It's an Australian station. But
was it both male and female? On the
yeah, we had a combination.
Okay.
And largely male, so 21 male, 3 female.
Oh, 3 female.
But tell you what, they were tough.
But were they? Sorry, let me ask you. Were there? Obviously, we all need a cuddle.
Yeah.
Was there any romances between the group?
I'll put a pin in that and I'll come back to that. I'll just finish this story and we'll get into that. So anyway, so we go, okay, well, let's merge those two things. And we ran this event, Cinco de Mayo, the 4th be with you, Star Wars Mexican Fusion Day.
Yep.
And straight away, people are making like Death Star pinatas. People are dressed up as like Mexican Han Solo. So you got your Han Solo stuff, your sombrero, your dodgy mustache, and you're quoting Star Wars, but in Spanish and all this sort of stuff. So to create your own fun. And we had open mic nights. Like I got up at one point and opened the musical night with some of the songs from Tiger King, which we'd all just watched on Netflix.
The crazy
got up
guy.
and sang I Saw a Tiger, which that was one of those moments in full kind of his name, not Joe Dirt, but whatever his name was. You're channeling that. So you make your own fun. And I also love as well, there's no shops or anything like that. So you make presents for anyone. If it's your birthday, you go, hey, what does Nick like? Oh, he's into podcast and business. So you think of a theme around, okay, how do I do that? And you might make like a wooden microphone and go, oh yeah, cool. Here's a cool little, or make a Grammy award or something and go, here's your Grammy award for your podcast. And you're making that out of scrap metal or scrap timber. And I've kept that in my life now afterwards, that rather than, oh, it's someone's birthday, let's buy them a present. Now, look, if they need something, you buy it, right?
Yeah.
But I don't like buying things unnecessarily. So I now just build everyone presents.
I love that.
So my whole family now have got
gold.
And my family have all got balance boards.
My birthday is August 18th, 40th of August.
Yeah.
Please.
I'll get you a balance board, and then I've got this whole setup now, like a little balance board under my desk, so I can sit at my desk on a Swiss ball balancing on a balance board. So you're not just typing, you're actually you're doing a core workout, working your Achilles. And
love that.
Fix my plantar fasciitis, just gone. So balance boards, under desk balance boards and stuff. So all that, and you build stuff, make someone a present. And they remember it 100 times or 1,000 times more if like, oh, Nick built me my birthday present. Even if it's crap, they'll be like, oh, you made it for me.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh, you went down the shops and bought something. Anyway, relationships on station. So.
Because 18 months without a cuddle is a long time.
18 months. I do joke. Someone once asked and said, I do a lot of public speaking and keynotes and that. And someone once asked me like, oh, how was that? And I'm like, well, one of the alternate titles of the book is 538 Days Without Sex. Yeah. So that was my experience.
To me, that is torture.
Yeah.
That is probably the toughest thing about the trip.
So that was that experience. But there was actually, in that team, there was a married couple. And so they'd applied for jobs on the station in different capacities, both got the jobs, and the program are happy with that, as long as you don't have a conflict of interest or a direct report situation. So, if I'm the station leader, I can't have my wife on station or something like that. It'd be inappropriate.
Yeah.
But they were in non-direct report roles. They worked in separate buildings. and they were amazing.
When you're in Antarctica, is there one skill that you refined? And the reason I asked this question, I had a job many years ago that I hated and had a lot of free time. So I used to juggle a lot in this job just to learn how to juggle. And I always tell my daughters, practice makes progress. So just keep practicing.
10,000 hours. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Is there one skill that you learnt over the time period that you go, I'm very glad I did, even though I had a lot of free time, I'm now proficient in this skill?
There was one thing that I had, this was just chance, that in the office sort of adjacent to mine, someone had put in a chin-up bar, and I'd always wanted to be able to do 10 heaves.
Yeah.
And
what are 10 heaves?
Heaves. So just overhand grass chin-ups. Yep. And so I saw that on day one, and I'm like, all right, I could do one. And you go, all right. Well, at that point, I thought I had a year. Yeah. Turns out I had 18 months. And you just get incrementally better. And then I set up a challenge with a mate back home, and we'd send videos to each other like, hey, what are your weekly reps? And some weeks you have good weeks. You have other times you have bad weeks. You get little twang here and there, and you take a couple of weeks off. But by the end of it, could do 10 chin-ups. And that was something to just go, great. Now I can't still do that, but I should have kept it up.
How was your health over the 18 months? Obviously, your diet's not bad, but it's not great. And I don't know how your exercise regime was, but overall, how was your health?
I think, look, there's a photo, and you could Google this one, of like ABC News, Fremantle.
Steve-O, can you pull that up? Please?
So Google like David Knoff, Fremantle, ABC News interview. And I'm like standing on the dock the day after I got back. And if you go to the images, it might come up. Standing on the dock. Yeah, there we go, the second one. There we go. That's how bad and you look at those, go to the photo to the left, which is me on the ABC News. Like, I'm pale. I haven't had any nutrients. My hair's looking pretty scruffy. I haven't had a proper haircut in a while. Go one photo to the left.
Like you've got more hair now than before.
An asteroid. So,
you know that also can impact your sex drive.
It can. Doesn't, but it can. Yeah.
Doesn't impact you. You didn't have sex for 18 months anyway.
Well, that's well, no, I wasn't on it then. So I got back, did that interview. And people are like, going to be bald, mate. And I'm like, all right. I'm like,
literally, I can see the difference with your hair.
That's right. And so then that photo there. But I think there was an element of, my hair was kind of in a bad state.
Yeah, lack of nutrients.
Yeah, lack of nutrients and some of that stuff. So that photo there is on the couch at ABC. You're a little bit porky there as well.
You look a bit healthier now.
Yeah, and that was a case of, I think, you just a bit of time back. And down there, like, you're getting plenty of sunlight in the summer, but you're wearing a lot of sunscreen, you're covered up.
Yeah.
So when you do get exposed to sunlight, you tend to get burnt. There's no ozone layer down in Antarctica, so you tend to just you're burnt or white. There's not a lot of tan. And yeah, so we were supplementing the diet with a bit of fresh food occasionally from the hydro lab. You're taking vitamin D supplements in the winter, and everyone's on multivitamins, and you're trying to manage it. But I think over the time, you don't have a fresh diet. And case in point is one of the things when you go in the hydro lab, once a month, you might be on the rotation to prune the crop. And you'd go in there, it's UV light. So you take your shirt off, get some UV light, you dance around. We had the radio on, so you dance around, pruning the kale. And I remember at one point, you're eating raw kale, and your body's saying, this is delicious.
Yeah.
And you go, something's wrong here. Because if you can eat fresh kale and go, oh my God, that's amazing, your body is saying, mate, you need greens. You need that stuff. And that was a reminder, because now if you go and eat fresh kale, you just go, that needs some oil on it. That needs some mayo and all sorts of stuff.
I presume the wildlife in Antarctica is protected.
Yes.
So if you come across a dead seal that's literally recently passed away, could you enjoy it? Or
no, not at all.
Not at all.
No, not at all. So we did find.
And I mean that respectfully, by the way.
No, absolutely. Look, those days, 100 years ago, they used to eat seals, eat penguins, they'd feed it to the sled dogs and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. That's 100 years ago.
Yeah.
We don't do that at all.
But not even the fish?
Not even the fish, no. So if you think of Antarctica as Earth's national park, you don't go into a national park and just start fishing. Now, there's incidental collect for some of the scientific projects. So we came across a dead macaroni penguin, which was the ones with the big yellow eyebrows. And they're quite rare where we were, and they're not kind of native to that particular region. So when we found that dead penguin, we actually found him alive, and then later on found him dead because it's too cold for him. A penguin froze to death in Antarctica, which,
Really?
Rare,
or someone actually, anyway, let's knock him off.
We're able to then, you've got to get a permit, and you've got to get the right approvals from the scientists that ran that project. And they said, collect it, bag it up. And then you've got to deal with all the quarantine stuff to get it shipped back to Australia for them to dissect it and look at that stuff. So from a scientific purpose or for scientific purposes, yes, people collect penguins, seals, whatever it is, but it's always with a purpose.
Would you ever go back to Antarctica and do another 12 months again?
I wouldn't. I'd never say never. It's not on my radar at the moment. I've done one winter, which was the long one, and I've done multiple other summer trips down there for 2 or 3 months, running generally science-focused trips, and I've done a couple of other resupply voyages where you just jump on the ship in Hobart, sail down, drop off a year's worth of food and supplies and people, come home a few weeks later, and they're pretty quick and dirty. You kind of need the experience of having wintered in some regards, and not absolutely critical, but that helps. So I can now use that experience and do shorter trips. And I'm not really set up at the moment to take another 12 months out of my life to do that. But
it's a commitment.
That's right. Never say never.
You mentioned earlier that you were in the Army.
Yes.
What exactly were you doing in the Army? What was your role?
Yeah, so I was an infantry officer. I'd actually started out just as a reservist and straight away loved it. I was at uni at the time, joined as a reservist and went, this is great. This is way more fun than bloody sitting in lectures and
fair enough.
Doing that every day.
I dropped that after 6 weeks.
Yeah, there you go. So and that sort of helped me do both. That I could scratch the itch of getting out and about, and all the leadership training as well I got to do through RMC and as an officer was great and set me up, I think, for success in later life as well. And then the opportunity came up to switch over to full-time service, go on a peacekeeping operation in 2007 and loved it. I was one of the youngest members of the platoon I was leading. So that's 30 soldiers. And you got...
How old were you at the time?
I was 22, I think.
It's young, yeah.
Yep. But absolutely phenomenal. Really experienced team. So I had a great platoon sergeant. Shout out to Glenn who's out there. Like he was a little bit older. He was Victorian policeman, and there was a couple of other cops in the team. Classic Army Reserve kind of background. If you've got cops and others, and then a mixture of other full-time and reserve members in the platoon and around the company. So it had a good vibe, and I had the experience around me and was able to acknowledge, right, I don't have the most experience. I've got the most training in terms of being an officer, but use your platoon sergeant, use the members of the team who had been to Iraq and been to other war zones and done more, using that to get the most out of it.
Would you recommend young people go to the Army or Special Force or the Navy, whatever it may be?
Look, it's up to you. I think there's a lot of...
Was it great for you?
It was good for me. And it's great for a lot of people, but it's not good for others. I think there's some great programs now. I don't want to be a billboard or anything for defence, but there's some great projects now you can do like a gap year or like I did, start out in the reserve. So you're not signing up for 4 years. Originally, I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And they sign up for like 10 or 15 years in terms of your return of service obligation once you've done all your training. And that's a huge commitment.
Yeah.
But there's other ways to go, hey, you either want to do it, and like I said before, if you go, I want to be a fighter pilot, and there is no second option, you've probably got the motivation to get through what is incredibly difficult training for them. Same with Special Forces. You go, I want to be in the SAS. And recruiting might say, oh, well, there's also these other roles. You can be an electrician or you can be a truck driver or you can be a whatever. And they're like, I want to be an SAS trooper with bloody camo paint on my face, kind of doing these ones and kind of like all that stuff, right? And just don't take no from an answer from recruiting and through you go. And there's a great story, what's his name? Dan Pronk, the author of Combat Doctor. He talks about his time when he did SAS selection. They hand out the form of like, all right, when you want to resign or withdraw from selection, fill out this form and you'll be off the course straight away. He took the form and ate it. He just said, I need to know that.
He ate it?
He ate the form.
Literally
ate the form. He probably got some calories out of it, which is always good on selection. And
someone's pretty wild when they eat forms.
But that was the thing of like, that form doesn't exist. I now can't quit.
I love that. And there is no form.
That's right.
Yeah, it does not exist. It's in my stomach.
I can't quit because I don't have a form to quit. Now, obviously, you get another form. Or if you say, hey, I need to quit, they let him out. But that was his way to just mentally say, I want to quit. Now, what was your question? Is like, is it good for everyone or was it good for me? Yeah, it was good for me. And it's something that if you want to do it, know that you want to do it, you can get a lot of good things out of it.
When I was young and lost, I actually applied for the Australian Federal Police. They rejected me.
On what grounds?
They didn't say, but I'm actually so thankful they rejected me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be where I am now. So from a negative comes a positive.
Yep.
So anyways, I applied for the Feds. Obviously didn't get in.
Yep.
Then I applied for the Air Force. Didn't get in. I probably wasn't smart enough for the Air Force. But I think it's good for some people just for the discipline side.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you want to do, like I probably didn't, like out of school, I wanted to be an engineer, I thought, and it turns out I didn't. And that time in the army gave me a chance to meet a bunch of other people from different walks of life, maybe fairly similar, a fairly narrow band in some regards. And then getting out and overseas on that peacekeeping operation.
Whereabouts were you?
Solomon Islands.
How was that? Was it pretty wild or was it pretty tame?
Look, we called it an armed vacation. At the time it could have gone from 0 to 100 quickly. Things can go wrong. And at one point, we're up against a riot and you go, okay, they've got coconuts, we've got rifles, we don't want to use them, but that's the kind of disparity. Anyway, seeing a local throw a coconut and smash a bulletproof windscreen with a coconut, you're like, all right, this is cool. Yeah, you go, that is, should get that guy pitching for the bloody Dodgers or something like that. That is good. That's right. So you go, and a lot of that was sort of anti-Chinese sentiment. They're trying to restore law and order, but you go, even if we're seeing.
But how did you guys relate to the Chinese?
Well, no, we didn't relate to like in terms of the locals.
They're just pissed off at the Chinese.
They were pissed off at the Chinese. We're there to just overall bring in kind of stability, and we're seen as the good guys. Like we're very welcome.
Windows of coconuts.
That's right. Like we're there in a way that you're invited by the Solomon Islands government to provide that security force, and there was a partner force with Kiwis and Fijians and Tongans and other Pacific islands. So you're very welcome. But when you're in the middle of a riot, not everyone's thinking that. Like, oh no, the Australians they're here to provide law and order. They're like, right, cool. We're ready to go, and something can go wrong, and that's the challenge. If you're there, you're trying to got all these political things going through your head, and it doesn't matter. All of that other stuff goes out the window, like he says in bloody Black Hawk Down. All that goes out the window when you're there and things are actually happening. Now, that's coconuts, not bullets, so the risk isn't that bad.
Yeah.
Then cut forward to years later when I was in real war zones. That's the same sort of stuff. You've got what's happening.
Whereabouts were you?
So I spent time in Iraq. And then in and around the war in Afghanistan, but I was actually just in Pakistan.
Tell me asking, how was Iraq?
Look, I was there for, I guess, Iraq War 3, 2016 odd, around the fight against ISIS, which is fascinating times. And we'd already started to learn the lessons out of Afghanistan at that point of the role Australian military was given. I was there as an advisor from the embassy embedded with the Australian Task Group. But we're already trying to not get too involved, acknowledging that the first and second Iraq War, the kind of 2003 onwards war, that we'd gotten too involved and it was too messy. And we then became unwelcome. You got rid of Saddam, but now go home. And we stuck around. When your coalition stuck around, it was a mess. Afghanistan was a mess in the end.
Yeah.
So we went in 2006.
When they evacuated within 1 month.
That's right.
Mess.
Yeah. I mean, there's some great stories out of that. I've got a mate that I've always been pushing it, telling. He's one of the last Aussies out of Kabul. Him and the ambassador and a few others on the last flight out. And I'm like, mate, you got to get that RM. He said, we're an RM Williams at the time. Get your RM framed, get it in the War Memorial of just like last boot on the ground, RM Williams boot, and put it in the War Memorial or something. So he's a great bloke. And that was a harrowing story of what that was like in those last days when you've got Australians that, or people that had helped out coalition forces and we're trying to make sure we can help them get out. But where do you draw the line of who helped, who didn't help, who do we trust? We can't just give everyone a free visa to Australia.
Yeah, so how do you determine who do you trust and who do you not?
That's the Afghan war in a nutshell. Who do you trust? And when we went into Afghanistan, we were invited and like in some regards and welcomed by different community aspects of the community. We're like, yeah, you know what? Get rid of the Taliban or get rid of Al Qaeda. We don't want them here. We don't need this war. Come in, find Bin Laden, get rid of Al Qaeda, whatever. And varying degrees thereof.
Yep.
20 odd years later, that whole population, just go home. If we'll take Taliban over coalition is essentially where it all came down to. And I've grossly simplified that whole thing, but that changes. And I remember when I first started working around that war, the conditions for success were like, okay, we're going to achieve women's education and we're going to achieve sanitation and health to this level and we're going to do this. And we're going to get everyone off opium crops and we're going to plant pumpkins or whatever it is, right? The success criteria when we actually left was like, right, leave.
Yeah.
That's
the
success.
thing is, do we make it better or make it worse?
Yeah. And that was an interesting thing to see. And hey, there's 100 examples in history where big governments and regimes have got that wrong.
Yeah. Are there any situations during Iraq or Afghanistan that were a little bit spicy that could have ended a different way? For you personally?
Yeah, hundreds. One example I like to say that was just one of those sliding doors moments is I was coming back. This is in Islamabad, so capital of Pakistan. I was coming back home. I had to get back to my house late at night, and at the time I was occasional to a dart or two, and I was out of durries, and so
you have the packet in the left shoulder.
Yeah, almost. And I'm like, okay, so there was a little shop, kind of a little. You'd call it a 7-Eleven, there's not quite a 7-Eleven. Yeah. And on the way home, and I'm like, I could duck in there and get it done. I'm like, no, you don't need that.
You need it. Just have a little puff.
Go home, go to bed. That'll be better for you.
Yeah.
Next morning, when I wake up, jump back in the car and driving back to work. And I lived about 10 Ks away from the embassy. And so driving back into work, driving past that particular shop, and it's completely destroyed. There'd been a suicide bombing there the night before. So I get to work, check the reports, check the kind of reporting on that. It was literally minutes after I would have walked in there and been buying a pack of smokes.
You said sliding door.
Correct. And that was one of those moments where you're like, oof. And at the time, that wasn't uncommon. It was fairly rare in Islamabad to have bombings, but across Pakistan, that was a daily occurrence. And they'd clean. It's the same as almost like a car accident here in Australia. People will stop me like, oh my God, cops will turn up, they'll clean it all up. An hour later, traffic's going. And that was probably the worst part and worst time in their recent history for them. And now, thankfully, a number of years later, it's doing a bit better.
And what made you exit the army? What was the turning point for you?
Yeah, so that was in my diplomatic career. So I had a few years in the army and then switched to working with foreign affairs and trade.
Gotcha.
And trading a camouflage suit for a tuxedo. And which everyone thinks diplomats
with the top hat,
tuxedo. You're like, no, it's normally cargo pants and a polo shirt sort of stuff. Yeah. But especially in those locations. What made me change was really some of those moments, they just start to accumulate and you go, one of these days the doors will slide the wrong way.
Mm.
And you see that with friends and colleagues and those around you. You hear stories of, do you hear about old mate, who doesn't have an arm now? You're like, yep, I knew him. And you start to know more and more people who've been physically and mentally scarred by the time in these locations. And for me, you're seeing the worst in humanity. I mean, when you're flying over places like Iraq and you have to fly, flying a helicopter, which is pretty, like part of you is like, this is cool, get to fly around in helicopter, in Black Hawks, you've got Apache gunships and all sort of stuff, in and around. Element of it that you go, this is great. When you're looking down over a city and a country that's just had, a generation of war.
Yeah, it's been annihilated.
It's just destroyed. And everyone you're meeting, morally and ethically, it's all questionable. Who do you trust? And you just go, I don't need this. And that was where I'm like, okay, how do I take the skills I've got from working in these uncertain remote locations around aviation and all these different capabilities and big logistics, small logistics, political, etc. It literally is lined up perfectly to go, hey, I reckon I could go run an Antarctic station. And you're swapping camouflage runways in the middle of a desert for brightly coloured buildings in the middle of Earth's biggest desert, Antarctica.
How's your faith in humanity now after seeing what you saw?
Look, it varies. I think individually humans are absolutely incredible, and you'll meet a lot of great people along the way, and including in some of the most dire circumstances. But it's hard to kind of understand and get around religion after spending so much time seeing religion used for incredibly bad purposes.
Yeah.
And that's not just on the kind of your Taliban, ISIS side of things. You see it twisted in a whole range of ways by different nations and different governments and different kind of apparatus and charity organisations that are doing good and bad. And that stuff starts to get tricky to...
That would wear me down, seeing all this stuff.
Look...
Especially when you see charitable organisations who you think are meant to be doing good.
Yeah.
But they're really not. They're probably doing more harm than good.
Or how do you deal with it? How do you grapple with, okay, it might be a charitable organisation that's doing 99% good, but funneling 1% to a terrorist organisation, or tacitly funding feeder programs or recruiting programs that, and you got to remember, like, it's a really hard one to get around if you haven't lived outside of Australia and or lived outside of first world countries. Because here everything works. You've got ambulances, you've got healthcare, you've got systems.
It's very easy.
We forget that, I think.
I think we do forget how easy it is here.
Correct. Whereas in a lot of other places around the world, if you don't have a job and you don't have family to support you, you'll starve to death. Or your childhood malnutrition, like you don't even have a chance because your brain didn't develop past the level of an 8-year-old because you just didn't get any nutrients when you were a fetus, then an infant, and then a child. You just didn't have a chance. And what can then get and some of the stuff there when you see it, and you go, this is just the worst of humanity, is you've then got, you'll have terrorist organizations who are recruiting out of that because that suits their means.
Yeah.
Of like, you go, oh, who wants to be a suicide bomber? You go, well, suicide bomber is not generally a 40-year-old educated, grown up.
They're young people.
They're young people who've had no other chance in life. They've been recruited into an extremist organization, groomed, trained, and then drugged up. So that's the other one. These the teenage kid. And then some of the stories, and this is all anecdotal stuff, you probably see it in movies and all that as well. But
it sounds like a movie.
Exactly. And you got these things, you go, all right, they're not going to say, hey, Nick, we need you to go blow yourself up. They'll say, hey, Nick, right. And you, Nick, you're a 14-year-old kid who's brainwashed and you just love their cause and you trust them. And they go, hey, we're going to do this suicide bombing, but you're not going to do it. We're going to get some other idiot to do it. We just need to do a dry run. We need you to drive the truck, go park it out the front of this, hotel or mosque or whatever it is. Just go park the car. We just need to do we do a timing run. And you just see, and just wait there for 10 minutes and see if anyone interrupts you. Just need to test if we can get away with it. And you go, okay, it's just a dry run, no dramas. Yeah. Drive along, park out the front, and then old mate goes, boom, blows you up and you didn't even know you were a suicide bomber. So these sorts of things, you go, look, now no one's going to be surprised that terrorist organizations aren't that moral.
Yeah.
But you just hear these stories, you see it, and you're like, I've had enough of that.
Oh, that's incredible. No. I love hearing this stuff. It's just mind-blowing.
Yeah, and thanks for, because normally people tell about Antarctica.
No. I really actually enjoy talking about your story as your life in the army. I just think it's fascinating. Yeah. Antarctica is great, and I want to hear both. But it's an issue that just never goes away.
And it's so hard to talk to people about. Like and that's not new, getting back from war zones and Antarctica as well, any challenge. How do you convey that to people when they get home? And how do you tell your story? And it's a challenge. I remember when I got back to Australia after the Antarctic trip in 2021 and certainly back to Melbourne. And no one really knew the story at that point. And I get home and people are like, oh, mate.
But they couldn't relate to it.
They couldn't relate because they're sitting there going, oh, you wouldn't believe it. Dan Andrews, you couldn't go to the playground. And I'm like, oh, yeah, it must have been tough.
Oh. When you compare stories, I'm like, it sounds so weak.
But it's context. If you've lived that COVID bubble in Melbourne and the uncertainty of...
Which is all we knew.
Exactly. And that pressure cooked everyone. Melbourne was still scarred by what went on there.
Yeah, and don't get me started with that.
That's right. So that stuff was sort of interesting. But I find that with explaining, everyone knows a little bit about the war in Afghanistan and Iraq in some regards. But I always like to kind of... You ask a few questions, you gauge a few people's understanding of, okay, can they name who was the president or who's, name a high-profile member of Al-Qaeda or something other than bin Laden. No. And then a few people name names, and then you go, cool, I can give you a pretty truthful version of what I went through and what happened over there. Versus someone that's like, oh, that was ridiculous. You should, and you go, yeah, okay, yeah, it was. And it's hard to know where to gauge that story. And that was an interesting part of when I wrote the book. Chatting to really high profile and an amazing Vietnam veteran, Dave Sabin, who'd been one of the platoon commanders at the Battle of Long Tan in Vietnam. And he and I were able to kind of talk about this. How do you tell a story? When you know you've got an interesting story to tell that very few will understand? His was obviously extreme, getting artillery fire from Viet Cong for a day and a night.
Yeah.
Leading a platoon in combat. And a lot of Australians died in that. Yeah. Completely different to what we went through. But it was trying to understand from him when he got back, and this is that whole narrative of Vietnam vets getting back and the narrative of, the veterans RSLs didn't want to welcome them, people didn't want to hear their story. I wanted to hear from him of how he dealt with that and how he then came to tell that story. And years later, now that and this was around the time the movie Danger Close had come out, so you've got kind of Hollywood versions of him and everything happening. How do you deal with that? And that helped me understand to kind of put pen to paper, start writing the book, tell the story, knowing that there's going to be people that aren't a fan of it. If a small number of the team weren't really on board, they're like, I don't know about that.
Oh, really? Why is that?
I think just in a lot of ways, like it's our story.
Yeah.
And some people are really protective of that. But it was, so importantly, I spoke to a number of the team who were then really supportive.
And how'd you address the people that weren't behind you writing the book?
Yeah, look, it was one of those things. No one really said, hey, absolutely, I completely object. They were just a case of, look, I don't want to be involved. Please don't write any characters or don't mention my name. Don't have anything to do with that. And like, yep, absolutely honour that. And I think, again, people were probably worried which version? How's he going to tell that story? And there's a quote in the book at the end. I say, look, there's 24 versions of this story, and this is just mine. And I tried to keep it very true to the fact that it's not a book that says, hey, here's my version of events and I did everything right and made the right decisions and I'm amazing. It's not that at all. And in fact, I'm really proud of some of the darker moments where I lie there awake at night going, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm lost. I'm beyond what I signed up for. The team, I felt at that point, is kind of fracturing and going in different directions. Yeah. And I had no answers. I'd always had a plan and always had answers to any other problem in life. At that darkest point, about the 12-month mark, we've still got 6 months to go. And even then, we don't know we're going home. I'm lying there awake at night, staring at the roof. You got minus 30 degrees outside, 100-kilometre-an-hour winds banging at your door and the windows, the buildings are shaking. And you're going, there's no way home. I don't know what home's going to even look like. Yeah. Will Dan Andrews let me go to the park or not? And you're trying to hold that team together.
So in your darkest moment, how did you solve the situation and overcome it?
Great question. The darkest moment, the way to solve it was to remember throughout history and remember other times in the Antarctic programs and Antarctic nations and different stations, people had similar problems and they'd found a way through it. And I remember thinking, as far back as kind of Ernest Shackleton and these times, you go, they got through it and they hauled boats across pack ice and then sailed to South Georgia, sailed across Elephant Island and South Georgia in reindeer skin jackets and with just man-hauling boats across ice. And I'm like, this is 100 years later. We've got Wi-Fi. Yeah. We'll get through this. Yeah. We can deal with this. We've got a great team, great equipment, well-equipped. We've got enough food and fuel. We've got all the things we need to survive. Yeah. There'll be a way home. Like you have that faith, but you've got to get... Now, at the individual level, though, how do you get through the micro moments of like, I don't know what to do? Yeah. I found it came back to, again, some of those routines or one of those practices, you go, right, I don't want to get out of bed because I don't want to face the questions and the same mundane routine stuff day in, day out. I'm going to get out of bed and do something I want to do. Yeah. So I'm going to jump out of bed and do 5 push-ups. And then I'm going to go get to my heave beam and I'm going to try and do my max reps heaves. And then I'll just turn that into a little workout. And then all of a sudden you go, now I can face the breakfast table. And now I can face the challenge. And interestingly, some of those just little limits and just giving people the chance to warm up and get ready to face the day, that can be so important. And 2 years ago, I ran a camp out near a place in the Bunga Hills, which is near a place called the Denman Glacier. It's part of a multi-year program. But we're running this scientific camp, 42 of us out in the middle of nowhere, 400 Ks from the nearest station. You're living in tents. It's minus 15 degrees outside. You're sleeping in a tent. Your pee bottle freezes. Your water bottle freezes. Your socks are frozen. And you're lying in your tent and you wake up and it's minus 15 degrees outside. You're nice and snug in your very, very expensive sleeping bag. Yeah. But you've got to get out of that sleeping bag, somehow get yourself dressed and get to the mess tent to hopefully get a hot cup of tea and start the day. Yeah. I'd wake up and kind of roll onto my stomach and start a plank, just start planking. Just to kind of generate some core temperature. And then you turn that into a couple of push-ups as you like roll your sleeping bag down a bit, do a few more reps.
Energize the body
a bit, start stretching, and then you're starting to put your overalls on and your beanie and your gloves and all that stuff. And then you get to the mess tent. And the hardest thing for myself is I was the camp leader. And then the hardest one as well was the poor helicopter pilots often used to get this. And the field officers that would take all the scientists out to their places. They'd walk in the tent. And people would they'd be like, hey, are we flying today? Can we go to this location? And they're like, mate, just got out of bed. I haven't had a cup of tea. And so just the one blanket rule was like, absolutely no work questions until 8 a.m. Yeah. And that's it. Now, it doesn't matter. It's 24 hours of daylight, so time kind of becomes a bit irrelevant. But it was this.
There's no night time, is there?
It's weird. You get up at 4 a.m. and it's pitch daylight. But that stuff's hilarious. That stuff becomes so crucial to success that you go, right, do not ask a work question until 8 o'clock. Yeah. And then at 8 o'clock, we're going to look at the weather brief. We're going to get the brief from the meteorologists. We'll do an ops briefing. We'll go through the plan. We'll look at the locations that are suitable. We'll look at the helicopter, like the aviation plan for the day. And then we'll brief it and then we'll go. And most of the time, you're just confirming what the plan was from the night before or, yep, the weather's no good in this location, so we're going to cancel your project for today and we're going to go. These other people need to be ready and they'd be excited. They go.
Knowing what you know now, if you were stranded in Antarctica again, what are 3 things you would take with you?
Good question. I would take yeah, talk about substance stuff. I'd probably take more, take some NMN.
Oh, you're right.
On that sort of
You're
stuff.
on the NMN.
I'd get onto finasteride a bit earlier. So then when I get home, I've got better looking hair than I had.
So vanity. I take the vanity drug.
I want to look better on your back. I think, look, it's a hard one because that leads to the question like, what would you change or what would you regret? And I actually don't regret anything we did, the good and the bad. The whole thing made it how it is. I think one of the things I'd change, it's not something I'd take because there's certainly nothing I feel that would have made it better or different other than, there's little bits of gravy that might have made it better. The one thing I'd change would have been if we could have somehow known or better conveyed to the whole team that, yes, we're signing up for a 12-month expedition and yes, you've been told things can change. It's Antarctica, things go wrong. Are you prepared to stay for 2 years, 2 winters, and even longer? Are you signed up to this in every aspect of the adventure? Mentally. Or are you here for a 12-month trip? And I think that would have meant 1 or 2 people would have said, I'm only good for 12 months, maybe 13 months. And then I've got to be back for other very important reasons.
Yeah.
Or, no, I'm indefinite. I'm doing this. I want to summit and I want to make it back. Doesn't matter what. And that would have been the one change. So it's not something I'd take, but it's something I'd mentally prepare the team for.
But you also would take the NMN and the finasteride.
Yeah, probably. If I knew about them before I left.
Did you see anything in Antarctica that you can't explain, i.e. UFOs?
Love this question because everyone's always like, where are the Nazi bases and the aliens and UFOs and stuff in Antarctica? Look, okay, I can't confirm on camera. I haven't seen any aliens,
flashing lights in the distance.
The thing is, like, Antarctica is so big and so much of it is relatively unexplored and certainly under the ice. We don't know what's down there. And we're drilling for kind of million-year-old ice cores and we're taking samples from these places. And some of the locations I've been to, you're the third group of people to ever go there. Like less people have been to some of these particular rocky outcrops than have been to the moon. Because, and in a lot of ways, because there's nothing there. There's a bunch of rocks. And so the first geologist that went there in the 1950s went, yep, there's rocks. Next team went in the 80s, went, still rocks. And the team that went in 2022 go, rocks. And we just got more rocks or we got different type of rocks or something. Or those rocks have moved. They're more exposed because there's been more melt. So maybe there's new rocks. The coolest thing I've seen in Antarctica that kind of goes down that rabbit hole was there was an old Soviet station that I was able to visit that's in an abandoned area. And it's sort of, there is still there's a newer Russian and a newer Polish camp there, but the buildings are still from kind of 1950s and Soviet era stuff. And that was just like stepping back in time. You're going into this room that's like wooden wall panels in the middle of Antarctica. And it's if they'd left yesterday. So you've still got hammer and sickle posters on the wall. You've got this like cast iron coal fire furnace in the middle of the building. And you can tell, you're like, geez, you can see the ghosts of like the expeditions past. Yeah. And there's still husky furs and cross-country skis and like from the 50s scattered around. And it's as if they left yesterday. And that was something you kind of go, that is just phenomenal. And then old Soviet era vehicles and other stuff. So
do you take their vehicle for a drive?
You're like, I don't know if you get a tetanus shot before you get in there, and how much asbestos you're inhaling by going near it. But I'm sure if you took a new battery down, it'd probably fire up.
Did you have any run-ins with any wildlife such as polar bears? Or anything else that kind of may kill you?
I love that question because I get it from both school kids and from CEOs and podcasters alike.
I'm a podcaster.
I know.
There we go. I'm a podcaster.
Right. There's no polar bears in the south. They're only in the north.
Well, I'm a dumbass. I'm a podcaster.
You're not the first one. So there's no land predators. So we're like, in terms of, you've got leopard seals and orca whales and other stuff, like apex predators in the water. That'll chase.
But there's nothing on land that
nothing on land that'll kill you. Now, if you got in the
that's a dumb question.
You got on the wrong side of a 1.5 ton elephant seal and you got in its way, I'm sure it'd inadvertently injure you. But essentially, no land predators down there. The most dangerous thing is the ice and the environment itself. It's so cold. If you fall over and incapacitate yourself, you could lapse into a coma and then frostbite and hypothermia are going to follow shortly after. And that's even in the height of summer. So it's a very dangerous environment to just exist, which you can mitigate that with the right equipment and training and other stuff. So that's your biggest risk is just the environment.
Were there any situations where you fell through Fell through the ice.
So I've fallen down a crevasse once, which was, and like not fully. I kind of just put a leg through a snow bridge, and then I was on a rope. This was a different expedition over on the Antarctic Peninsula with a bunch of mates.
Was it life-threatening?
Not really. I've been in 2 avalanches while snowboarding down there, which was, and again, little baby avalanches, or I wouldn't be here telling the story. They were pretty harrowing where you just, and this was again another private trip over on the Antarctic Peninsula, snowboarding with a bunch of mates, as you do. And the snow gives way and all of a sudden you were snowboarding 1 minute and now you're just a passenger.
Just looking back on an avalanche.
Exactly. And you're just sliding down the mountain with snow everywhere. The rope I was on.
Don't fall. Well,
that's the thing. Like you're roped together. So, you've got a safety line between you and your mate so that if anything happens, within the first second, that just gets wrapped around a rock and snaps. So you see the safety line just flailing. You're like, all right, well, I'm on my own now.
Shit.
And then the avalanche stops and we're all spread out now hundreds of meters apart.
Yeah.
But going, we don't really know where we are. And you don't want to walk by yourself because of the risk of crevasses. Now you don't have the safety line, but you go, well, I've got no option.
Yeah.
So we all just had to beeline for the nearest rocks, hoping that we got there and sure enough, we're luckily all safe. A few cuts and bruises. And,
Thank you for the chat. That was incredible. So thank you.
Thanks for having me on and good luck with everything you're doing as well.